Welcome to the Rising Laterally podcast. This is about connecting industries, technologies, histories, and psychologies to find intersections that can lead to personal and professional growth. Our conversations will be a blend of research, insights, and personal stories, and we hope by listening you become more fascinated about yourself and the world you live in. On behalf of Jay Arjun, this is Arjun Sachdev, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Rising Laterally podcast. Thanks for joining us for another episode. We want to give a thank you to all of our listeners and a special thank you to those of you who have subscribed, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or YouTube. Hitting that subscribe button really does help us grow the platform. Arjun and I are super excited about what we've been able to do over the last couple of months. So thank you for joining in and supporting us in this.
Absolutely, Jay. And to all of you, we appreciate you returning for another episode. And if you're a first timer, we welcome you. So let's jump into it. If you're feeling stagnant in your life right now, if you're maybe not happy with work, if you're in an unhealthy relationship, if you feel locked, then you need to start to think about some ways to unlock your potential and reinvent yourself. Think about your strengths. Think about what makes you curious. Think about getting a little bit more flexible with your mindset. You think about right now, we have technology, we have AI, we have algorithms. All of that is transforming how you could be delivering value back to society. So there's literally fewer limits today, and there's fewer excuses for you. If you actually think that you're good where you're at and settled in life, you're at risk of limiting your mindset and what you're capable of. Changing with the times is super important. Reinventing yourself, though, does not mean that you have to be disruptive. It's just getting you to that next point in life or that next place in life. It can be slow, it can be steady, but it does mean that you need to let go of any fear of change. Fear of change is what keeps people from reinventing themselves. You think you're to yourself, will someone hire me if I leave my cushy job? What happens if I lose my job? What happens to my health insurance? Or is someone going to go out with me if I break out of this relationship? So a lot of what ifs. And if you've already told yourself it's not going to happen, then yeah, you're not going to make any adjustments because it just sounds too painful and you're not going to be able to overcome it. But you actually need to make adjustments to achieve your life's goals. And you're going to have to do things that are not tied to a biweekly paycheck and not tied to what you're comfortable with. It's more about the opportunity and what you get out of it. And that's why reinventing yourself right now is so important and something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, change is so natural, as you talked about before. It's so important. I think when people hear the idea of reinventing themselves, I think a lot of people have a positive affective response to that. Like their brain lights up when they hear those words, and listen to that. If that's the reaction that you're having internally, then that says something. And I think when we think about reinventing ourselves, it's not just like you can go out and decide to be whoever you want to be. It's not like you're recreating yourself from whole cloth. The way I think of it, it's like figuring out where there's misalignment between where you're at now and what you want, and making the updates required to bring those things together. And the updates required are twofold. Like, first, you're going to have to do the work in your inner world, in your psychological world. So getting your unconscious and your conscious desires synced up. What do I really want that I'm not really paying attention to? And bringing that up into your consciousness and, paying attention to that and acknowledging that desire. And then in the outer world, from a more practical perspective, you want to close the gap between where you are and what you want by setting up a public life where you can be the person you want to be. But all of that starts with like figuring out what you want. If your brain is lighting up when you hear the idea of reinventing yourself, figure out exactly why. Where is that discord and what needs to be tended to psychologically? That's the first thing you have to do in my mind.
Absolutely. And I mean, you think about what you want and why, it sounds like you're going to start planning. So would you think that planning is something that would help you overcome fear?
I think the fear of change is ultimately the biggest thing that keeps people from moving on. And I think, the way I think of it is like when you are willingly inviting a big change into your life, you're taking all of these things about your life that are currently in a state of order and then throwing them into a state of chaos intentionally, which is really hard to do, and then trying to reconstitute that chaos back into an order that's better than what you had before. And I think planning can really help you get your mind at ease. Not at ease. It's going to be hard regardless of what you do, but it can make, entering that chaos deliberately, a better experience for you, and not quite as daunting as it would be otherwise. You think about something like moving, moving is, I think, a pretty like psychologically taxing thing to do. You think about where you are now, where all your pots and pans are, where you keep your miscellaneous items, where the laundry is, where your favorite breakfast spot is. Just picking up and moving either from one side of town to the other, or moving from one to the other. When you're in that state of flux, when all of your things are in boxes and they're in a moving truck and you don't know where they are, and you don't know if the keys you got from your new landlord are going to work when you get to your new house, like that's being in a state of chaos. And that's what happens when you walk towards change. But ultimately you get to the new house, you get all your stuff, you unpack it, you make a new home, and it was better than it was, better than what you had before. So I think, to your point about planning, planning for chaos and making it as sort of deliberate of an experience as possible is certainly helpful when overcoming fear of change.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that'd be some shit if somebody gave me keys and they didn't work. But let me
Yeah.
see, let me say this. I think that there's layers to this, because you can have that psychology around fear, but maybe, when you think about reinventing yourself, it doesn't have to be a drastic move or a career change. It could be simple things like cleaning out your closet and cleaning out some of the physical clutter in your life and getting rid of things that you don't need anymore. It could be clearing out your mental clutter. It could be just refining your diet. It could be just changing your daily routine. So it's about trying these small new things. And, maybe once you start to overcome, like, hey, I changed my diet. I'm like 30 days into this or 60 days into this. I feel good. I'm starting to get over that psychology around fear. Next time there's a bigger event in my life, let's say it's a move or a career change, I'm going to be better equipped. I'll be stronger in that situation because I have refined my diet. I have refined my daily routine. I've cleaned out my closet. I've done these little things that still count as reinventing myself.
Totally, yeah. And I think going back kind of to the inner world, outer world thing, I think health would probably fall within the domain of the inner world, and keeping your inner life as orderly as possible will make it easier to embrace chaos in the outer world. So if you're like a mess in terms of your physical, mental health, it's going to be really hard for you to make a big move, or vie for a life-changing promotion. Like, it kind of always starts with getting your inner world in line and moving from a place of strength there as you try to move pieces around in the outer world of your life.
How lucky are we that we're talking about like fear of change as if like we have, these are the cards that are dealt to us and we can actually, we don't, it's not forced on us to change our situation. How lucky are we to be able to have that conversation? That's not true for everyone.
Oh, that's not true for everyone. The person that comes to mind is Christopher Reeve. Are you familiar with his story?
Yeah, I am. That's a
Yeah,
great example.
yeah. He was. I'll go through the whole story. It's as tragic as it is inspirational. But he was a leading man in the 1970s. Um, some of our younger listeners may not be familiar with him, but he was a pretty iconic figure in popular culture for a number of decades. He was most famous for his role as Superman. Incredibly charismatic, fit, successful, family man, on top of being an A-lister. He was really a guy that had it all, was loved by the public, and just lived a really big life. I was reading about him this past weekend. Like, beyond his acting career, he built a sailboat and sailed from Chesapeake to Nova Scotia. He was a
There you go.
licensed pilot, yeah, who sailed across the Atlantic solo twice. I mean, he lived like 10 lifetimes in one. Just one of those guys that had such an appetite for life and really took it by the horns. And on top of all
Seems
that,
like he was the original most interesting man in the world.
yeah, literally, yeah, in the flesh, seriously. Yeah, there's those types of people really only come around once a generation. And on top of all of that, he was actually a competitive horseback rider as well. Unfortunately, in 1995, when he was 42 years old at the time, during an event, his horse bucked, and it was a freak accident. His hands became tangled in the reins, and he ended up landing headfirst on the ground and shattered his first and second vertebrae. So his skull and his spine were actually completely disconnected. And he'd end up being a quadriplegic for the rest of his life from this one freak accident, at a competitive horse riding event. And that would be a brutal outcome for anyone, but especially brutal outcome for someone who lived such an exceptionally active life. I mean, he was, he had been making good use of the body he was blessed with for all of his years up to that point. And it was a really devastating moment nationally. I think it was analogous in some sense to something like Princess Diana's death, because it was just this horrific thing that happened to someone that was so looked up to, and it made everyone sort of face their own vulnerability. So that's the low point of the story. But in the spirit of embracing change, embracing transformation, I'll share the second half of the story. With incredible support from his family, he was actually able to not only make a modest recovery, he would remain a quadriplegic, but he continued to live a really active life. He became an advocate for spinal cord injuries. He hosted the Paralympics. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention. He narrated film. He was chairman of the American Paralysis Association and vice chairman of the National Organization on Disability. He co-founded the Reeve Irvine Research Center for Spinal Cord Research, and a lot more than that, bound to a wheelchair, with very limited movement. And as he described it, when breathing unassisted, it was like breathing through a straw from the bottom of the ocean floor. So with
That's
all
ridiculous.
with all of those hurdles, he was still able to do so much. And that was a person that was forced to reinvent themselves. He had to redefine who he was and what he was doing in the face of an unexpected circumstance, just torturously bad luck. But he rose to the occasion. I think the message there is, if someone can thrive like that in the face of such an unexpected adversity and find just a new way to be in the world, a new way to live that's not only meaningful, but exceptional, if he could be that brave in the face of that kind of loss, then chances are each of us can too. I mean, despite, our circumstances, I think we can all find a little bit more courage to move forward and be a more complete, more fulfilled version of ourselves.
The dude went from Superman to an even stronger icon. It's pretty incredible.
Absolutely.
It puts everything in perspective. Like, yeah, I mean, he was having a great life, and then the cards were dealt the way they were, and next thing you know, he's actually had more of a legacy.
Yeah,
and it's just about like how you react.
Totally. Yeah, I would feel like it would be so tempting to just fall into resentment and just anger at the world, to be on such a high and have that all taken away from you in this one freak incident. And he leaned into the moment, which is
he probably never asked why me.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure he didn't.
And if he did, it was more like, oh, because, I'm going to use my platform and now actually I'm going to have more of an impact. As opposed to shying away from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because I mean, that's an interesting example. And I think there's a comeback story with, other people too in the athlete world. If you think about, I mean, you mentioned the 70s. One example from the 70s is Roger Staubach. He wins the college Heisman Trophy as the best college player. Then he goes to Vietnam for 4 years. Then he gets drafted by the Cowboys. He's 27 as a rookie. So think about that right there. He goes on to win 2 Super Bowls. He wins an MVP. He's like part of America's team. They called him Captain America. But interesting enough, it's like that didn't even get to him, because behind the scenes, this is an individual. We talk about reinventing yourself. I mean, this is an individual who had it all as a football player. And then he actually started his own commercial real estate company. So when he
Wow.
retired, he was only 37. I mean, you had plenty of life. And he already lived a complete life. I mean, going to war, playing in the NFL, winning awards, winning Super Bowls. I mean, what more can you ask for? Long story short, his company, it used to give land to like AT&T, Kmart, McDonald's. And next thing you know, fast forward to 2008, he's able to sell it for over $600 million.
Oh my God.
So, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So you talk about reinventing yourself. I mean, he was already past the age of 35. He had a full event horizon ahead of him, and he reinvented himself. So another character from the 70s that, you know, didn't let the fame just be like, all right, I'm here and that's it. It's like they had a platform, they reinvented themselves, and they left a different type of legacy, if not a better one.
Totally. Yeah. I think he's got to be one of the most successful athletes post sports career. I mean, that's just an insane level of success in a totally different domain than the one he had already excelled in. That's just nuts. Do you think on that?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll let you, for those listening. Yeah. Okay. So do you think that it's harder for people to reinvent themselves later in life, or it's more the fear comes out more, there's more sort of that voice inside your head saying that it's not possible? You mentioned he did all that after 35. What effect do you think, or what kind of impact does the variable of age have on all this?
Well, I think it's natural for people as they're older to just be like, I'm not going to change the status quo. You know, I've been doing XYZ for 20 years, or I've been married for 20 years, and it's just what it is. And again, thinking about change and thinking about all those what ifs, especially as you get older, you're definitely facing more fear. And that's why I'm trying to say, if you are in a situation where you're a little bit older, let's say you're north of 40, north of 50, north of 60, and you're thinking to yourself that you're not satisfied or there's something missing, well, technology allows you to get out there. With the use of social media, there's really not many excuses. If you have something valuable, you can absolutely share it and you can transform your life. I mean, you think about people, and again, 30 is not old, but Bezos didn't start Amazon until age 31. You think about, you know, Vera Wang. Vera Wang was a figure skater and a journalist. And then when she was 40, she got into the fashion industry. And now she's one of
Wow.
the
Oh
top
yeah,
women's
she's
designers.
one of the biggest names. Yeah.
So my point is that like age is just in your head kind of thing. It's like if you don't want to break status quo, or if you don't have the support system around you that kind of generates these thoughts and is supportive. And let's say, you know, you don't have a support system. The support system is yourself, you and your ego. You have to have a conversation with yourself about, look, my time or my event horizon here on the planet is pretty limited. I'm already 50. Best case scenario, I got another 50.
Yeah, best case. Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, no, I mean, I think going back to your point around technology, it is a really, really, really unique position that we're in. There are 108 billion humans that have walked the face of the earth, and I think a vast majority of them would love to play the game that we're able to play right now. I mean, you know, 200 years ago, people didn't have the means to communicate across long distances. Now we can communicate in all forms, you know, like written, audio, video. Like we can reach people in our full form a world away. And like that's such an interesting point of leverage in terms of the influence you can have on the world. I mean, people, you know, literally weren't able to have any impact, weren't able to make any waves outside of the small community that they were living in. The technology, the infrastructure wasn't there to facilitate that kind of influence. And now, you know, someone, I don't think anyone is yet, but someone in like, you know, Australia could be listening to us right now. You know, it's a totally open forum for the entire world. This is really cool.
Jay Blue, we have listeners in Asia, Europe, and the States, by the way. So anyway, listen,
Nice.
once you have a voice, you have to go for it. That's my point. I mean, I'll just give you personal stories. I mean, we can sit here and just riff about like the hypothetical, but if you've been listening to us, you know I took a leap from corporate to this, and that took some guts. But I knew that I was going to do this for free, right? And so helping for me, when I was helping people understand like they can get more out of the journey of life and seeing that light bulb go off in people, that was what started to really motivate me to build this podcast with you and this brand. And so again, once I found my voice, I had to go for it, and technology helped with that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's like when you start to go down this route and you start to pursue your dream, like you have to make some adjustments. And it's like your level of work, the things you sacrifice, your goals, they all change. But like as I reinvent myself, I am not giving myself another option. I left an option that left me unsatisfied. So for me, as I go through this reinvention, it's like, why would I even put that back out there as an option? So this is my only option. And it's just one of those things where it could have been daunting, but I broke it down and I started to embrace some of the small changes that can take place every single day. Like
Mm-hmm.
for example, taking an online course, building out my network, researching, reading, a lot of these small steps help because they set you up for any of these unexpected or unusual changes that could come in life. And,
Mm-hmm.
a part of transformation or part of reinventing yourself, like from my perspective, is also addressing the need to change what other people were thinking about me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I was moving in a different direction, but other people may not have seen that. So I started demonstrating that on LinkedIn with some of the posts that I was doing. So again, using technology, because those daily small events started to reinforce that, yeah, I am doing new things and I'm not who I used to be. And, breaking that stereotype is still occurring, but that's part of reinventing myself. So again, my point is that technology is there. If you have value, you should be able to share it and start operating more off of short-term goals, like plan by the day, plan by the week, plan by the month. Next thing you know, you start to accomplish these little goals. Those start to pile into milestones, and you actually start to feel like there's some climbing that's taking place right now. So I'm like super willing to risk my life for this mission because I have seen the impact that it's had on people. And somehow in life, I'm just going to believe that all the places are going to fall, or all the pieces are going to fall in place. And it's
Yeah.
just about doing whatever it takes right now to get it done. And if you think about my 40-hour work week right now, quote unquote 40-hour work week, it's preparing, it's researching, it's reading, it's writing, it's editing, it's creating content, it's building out the social media, it's talking to people, it's networking, all with the goal of just helping people every week. And so I wanted to share that as just examples of some of the things I've done in terms of reinventing myself over the past few months. And that's from a work perspective. We can talk about what I've been doing
Yeah.
with a relationship perspective.
Yeah.
Ask my wife. She knows I'm not perfect. I got a long way to go.
Yeah. No, totally. Well, there's a lot, dude. There's a lot there, and a lot of it actually connects in with the legend of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's just one of the guys that I think will go down as one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century. But for
Mhm.
people that have only really appreciated him as like a caricature of himself. He was a guy that I think for his accent and for his larger than life personality got caricatured a lot in the media. They had the whole Governator thing, but for people that really haven't gone into his story, I would encourage them to take a look because it really is a story of having no plan B, which is something that you mentioned earlier. Like he was a guy that, you know, there's actually a really awesome video on YouTube. Type in Arnold Schwarzenegger no plan B, where he talks about how having a plan B only directs energy away from your plan A, and having that safety net is actually sort of a bad mentality to operate in. But he was a guy that immigrated here from Austria, I think in his early 20s. He was a pioneer in bodybuilding. Everyone knows bodybuilding now, but when he first did it, it was not popular. It was like people thought it was weird for men to be putting that much muscle on. It was kind of a freak show more than anything to the public. And then he moved from bodybuilding to become an A-list movie star. Agents thought he was out of his mind, thinking that he could win any role with his accent and, you know, let alone become an A-list action star. But he went in with the intention of becoming not just an actor, but of becoming a movie star. And he did it. And then he ended up, you know, becoming the governor of California after that, which is now the 5th largest economy in the world. Again, people doubted him. And, you know, I think just the guts to do what he did in his early 20s, to move to a place like Hollywood from a country a world away without a mastery of the English language, with nothing. He talks about when he first moved here, you know, his neighbors were bringing over pillows and you know, blankets for him because he was literally had nothing in his apartment. And, you know, everything he did, he crushed. And he conquered Hollywood, which is a place that, you know, chews people up and spits them out. He went from Austrian to American, you know, bodybuilder to actor to governor. Every time along the way, people were doubting him. You know, it's like people at home saying, "Don't move to America. What are you thinking? You have no home there." And moving into acting, it's like, "Oh, you'll never land a role. You know, you're this meathead bodybuilder." And then moving from an action star to a politician, people were mocking his intelligence, assuming he was less intelligent than he actually was based on his career and based on his accent, when he actually is a very smart, you know, articulate person. And he just proved people wrong every step of the way. And he was able to live on that front foot by having no plan B. And,
Exactly.
you know, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to live like that. But I'm sure everyone like that has an exceptional story was able to embrace risk and embrace, going back to my earlier point, the chaos of life, you know? I mean,
Exactly.
like, yeah.
It's
Anytime you
going to
make a big
happen.
change like that, yeah,
It's all
absolutely.
about reacting. It's about reacting. And quite frankly, reinvention, it comes down to a dedication, a commitment, and again, just getting rid of fear. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to have a story to tell somebody. It's like, wow, great. You know, at least you tried to take some action. But like, it just goes to show, I mean, he was in his mid 30s when he was making these moves from the movies to the political world. You know, it just goes to show it's just never too late to reinvent yourself. It's actually required to survive. And I know we've been talking about people, but look at what companies do. I mean, we can sit here and talk about, you know, Netflix going from online blockbuster to Netflix and chill. We can talk about Amazon going from selling books to dominating the world. But there's actually some other interesting stories out there. I mean, if you take, for example, McDonald's, people might forget, but in the early 2000s, they were getting a lot of pushback for what was on their menu as people were trying to get more healthy. And actually in 2003, they suffered their first quarterly loss in 38 years as a public company. But then since that day and since that time, I mean, look at them. They changed their menu. They added milk. They added salads. They made it more healthy. And they added like the nutritional information for people. Like there was more transparency. And so like, look at the success that they've had, not only here, but globally. And so if a big company like that can make a change, I'm sure you can too.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you heard of the idea of thinking from first principles? Elon Musk has talked about it a lot. I don't know if that's ever landed on your radar.
No, tell me about it.
Yeah, so it's basically the practice of actively questioning every assumption you think you know about a given problem or scenario, and then
He
creating.
would do that.
Yeah, he definitely would. That's how he's been able to do what he's done. But so you throw out all those assumptions, and then you create new knowledge and solutions from scratch. It's really, I think, a fancy way of saying thinking outside of the box. But to bring the mental model to life here, it would be like if, you know, people are trapped on island A and need to get to island B, and everyone's tried to swim from island A to island B, but it's been too far and they haven't made it. And then everyone's still trapped on island A, says, "Oh, we'll never make it to island B. You know, it's distance is too great. We'll never be able to swim it." And then someone among them being like, "Well, why do we have to swim it? Why don't we create a boat?" You know, it's like, even though all we've tried is swimming it, that doesn't mean that we can only keep attempting to swim it. There's other options if we go back to our original intention here, which is just getting from island A to island B. So, you know, it's basically like stripping down everything to the single goal that you have. And I think McDonald's is a great example of that because, you know, they were a fast food joint. They made burgers for 50 odd years. You know, a lot of, you know, maybe other executives at the time that weren't as creative as those in place that were able to update the menu may have thought like, well, we make burgers. How do we make burgers healthier? How do we make burgers more attractive in a climate where people are turning to health? And, you know, they had to kind of go back to first principles and think, you know, our point is driving people in the door. So like maybe we just change the menu wholesale in order to accommodate that interest in salad stuff.
Dude, they also started doing breakfast all day instead of like, okay, breakfast is going to be just in the morning and then you have to come in for a 500-calorie burger or whatever with fries. They made breakfast available all day. So again, to your point, getting people in the door and providing a quote unquote healthier option in terms of calorie count. That goes a long way as well. But you mentioned outside the box. I know you mentioned it in like the thinking outside the box perspective, but another example is Lego. This is really cool. Lego, they've been around since 1932. They were and really have always been a dominating toy company. But you fast forward to the 2000s, next thing you know, there's video games, there's internet. Next thing you know, toy companies are at risk. So what did Lego do? Lego, they actually introduced Lego Friends, which was a line that opened it up to young girls to get them to start playing with Legos. And then they really took it to the next level when they made the Lego movie, which was a blockbuster hit. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah.
And then I thought the Lego Batman movie was good too. And next thing you know, Lego's a cool franchise again. But there was a moment in time where in the 2000s, they were on the brink of bankruptcy.
Wow.
But they came back. So it's like, why do people think that they don't need to reinvent themselves? It's unacceptable to use fear as a cop-out.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's a great example. I think Lego is a really interesting example because they were such a bellwether for so long, and they were,
Right.
almost knocked out of the game, which is something that I don't think a lot of people realize. And maybe that's a good kind of metaphor for life too. I think, there are a lot of people that have internal struggles that everyone might not be fully tapped into. And, externally, it may seem like they have a good reputation, they have a good career, but there's kind of rot on the inside. Like there's something that they need to attend to in order to be in a position to thrive over the next 20 years. So, that example is a company, but I think that's a good maybe metaphor for personal development as well. Like, figuring out what you need to change in terms of your inner life in order to set you up for success over the next few decades.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remind people that it'll go at the pace that it's supposed to go. Like, don't expect this overnight. Look at an example like Old Spice. Old Spice is cool now, but you may not know that this company, first of all, it came out in 1937, and originally it came out for females. Then in 1938, it became more of like a male brand. But, it's always had this, outdated kind of stigma around it.
Yeah, Old Spice, right? Yeah.
Old Spice, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
musky.
Yeah.
But in 1990, Procter & Gamble, they bought Old Spice. They tried to rebrand, but it almost took them 20 years. It wasn't until 2008 when they started their swagger campaign that it made, Old Spice cool again and back on the radar, and like really hit the demographic that was using Axe.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Axe.
So
Blast from the past. Yeah.
right. So like Procter & Gamble, it took them 18 years to get the hit.
Yep.
But it didn't stop them.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I use Old Spice. I've been probably using Old Spice the last 10 years. It's so funny that you bring up the Axe thing, man. Like Axe takes me back to high school dances. And I think probably around the time they launched that swagger campaign, I made the transition and it was like the perfect campaign because it wasn't just for young people, but it was appealing to young people as well. So I feel like a lot of people probably transitioned off of Axe and landed on Old Spice and stayed there because it wasn't just this juvenile brand. So yeah, it's a pretty brilliant
And they were
campaign.
hilarious. Like those commercials were hilarious, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
talking about like, look at your man, now look at me. Look at your man again, now look at
yeah,
me. He's not me.
yeah, exactly, dude. Yeah, they kind of ushered in the I feel like they were, along with Geico, kind of ushered in like the absurdist ads, which is another, on the point of reinvention. I'm sure a lot of people looking at those ads, a lot of ad executives were like, these are too weird. Like, no one's going to get that. Like, we're going to look like total weirdos. And people love them, dude. It's been that whole genre has been a staple of ad spots for the last 20 years. So just because someone thinks it may be weird the first time they see it doesn't mean it won't be insanely popular later.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. Well,
Yeah, that's what
yeah,
I'm saying. Like, there's gonna be, you know, a group of people that will understand that, okay, you know, you've been in a situation, you've been thinking about getting out of it. And you may not have thought about the tools or resources available to you. And I mean, at the end of this, it's like you can take small steps. It, you know, it doesn't have to be a disruptive reinvention. It can be slow and steady. But the biggest thing is overcoming fear and being grateful that that's the only thing you really got to overcome, because again, sometimes the way life works, like, it doesn't go your way and you may have to react or adjust to the cards you're dealt. But having that ability to just overcome fear of change is super important, especially right now.
yeah, totally. And to linger on that for a few more beats here, I think a lot of people may have fear that they don't even recognize to be fear. So
Oh,
we talked about Jung and the shadow in the previous episodes for listeners that weren't there for that. The shadow is basically any element of your personality or elements of your personality that you don't want to acknowledge, that you hide away in your subconscious. There are still active forces in your waking life. You're just not aware of them. And I think fear is a very common thing that people hide in their shadow. So going back to some of the comments you opened the podcast, this episode up with, you know, people will say like, I can't leave my job because I have a good thing going here, like people really like me, or I can't leave my girlfriend because even though she treats me like crap, you know, she really loves me. And or I don't know, maybe, you know, why would I want to travel abroad? Like, I have everything I want here. Like, I'm a homebody. That's a good thing. And it's like you're making rationalizations without even recognizing them to be rationalizations. That's the point of rationalizations. You think they're genuine thoughts, but there's no distance between you and the thought to recognize it as an excuse. So it's like, again, going back to the idea of the inner world, like, if you are stagnating and you're in a place that's unhappy and you think it's because of exigent circumstances and not because of your inner fear, really do some work to like plumb the depths of your subconscious and figure out if you're afraid to move, you know, because ultimately because of fear. And that's a bad reason to be afraid to move, you know, because change is scary, it is hard, but like change is an essential part of life. And, you know, facing change head on is really the best way to go through life, because it will, if you're living in a way that's inconsistent with your inner personality, it will eventually catch up to you. That is the midlife crisis. You know what I mean? It's like the fire that, you know, we suppress these fires for too long. The underbrush, you know, starts to get out of control. And then we have these massive fires that burn the entire forest down because there was this artificial suppression. And we have that same sort of artificial suppression of our fear. And then we have to go through these terrible periods every 20 years where we burn our whole personality down because we're so sick of the whole construct. So much healthier way is acknowledging fear along the way.
yeah, and it'll probably be a smoother transition to whatever the next phase is for you, or quote unquote the next chapter. So you know, it's going to be smoother transitions. And you know, again, going to one thing that we kind of touched on but not really, but like relationships. Like reinventing yourself with relationships. Like you don't always have to leave a relationship. You can activate certain things that may not have been activated in a while. For example, like your fun factor, or just, when tough times come up, are you trying to be effective, or are you trying to be right? I mean, it's like, did I do a better job of reacting to that? Was this more of like an incorporating thing for both parties, or was this just selfish? So there's some things like that can take place within a relationship that allow you and it to reinvent it, not only yourself, but the relationship as well. So you can bring things back to life if you put some effort into it. It doesn't mean you have to run away from a relationship and just, run away from everything and kind of be like, oh, well, that didn't work, I'm out. You got to put a little bit of effort in.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And reinvent it, and, again, add to your life's journey, add to the events, and, discover what's working, plan, try new things out, and understand what's actually supportive and what's not.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you can make modest changes as well. Those can be incredibly effective in life and incredibly effective in relationships. And it's burning everything down to the studs is usually not the ideal outcome. Sometimes it's necessary, but to your point, it's much better to make incremental changes along the way that allow you to live more in step with your inner life and what you want, or in the situation, your partner's life as well, and what they want. And I mean, it takes effort. It takes a certain bit of courage to embrace those small changes along the way. Like a consistent level of courage, always willing to kind of live in a state of adaptation and state of flux. But it's much better than being rigid for 20 years and then having to blow the whole thing up.
Exactly. If there's one thing you walk away after listening to this episode, is that we just hope that you go out and unlock your potential.
Amen. I got nothing else to say.
JB, it's always a pleasure. I can't wait to do this again with you next week. And thank you to all our listeners. We hope that you found it useful. And again, we're just doing this for you. If we can help one person, that's really our mission. And can't wait to do this again.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Rising Laterally. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and were able to walk away with some new thinking that could help you in your personal or professional growth. Please make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. And if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode, we'd love for you to pass it along. See you next week.